This goal today, so let's start with the introductions.
Scott Rickenbacker, Director of Construction Projects in Tennessee.
Haitham Mahmood.
I'm Frank Stout, and I work with Advice Tracks.
Stephen Hornbrand.
Can I sit next to you?
Brian Williams, of the Architects. Andy Hume. Not paying attention.
Melissa Parodia, Mirelli.
Tom Keener with the Architects.
Jackie Brown with myself. Sorry.
And Art Cancel, architect.
Well, how are you, everybody? So, we are going to follow the procedures after last meeting. So let's go with the approval of the January 11 meeting agenda. So I have a motion to.
Motion to approve. Seconded.
Okay, who motioned? Oh, thank you.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Perfect. Julie, you have all the names?
Yep, Ryan, it's Steve motion and Ryan second for the agenda.
And next on the agenda will be the approval of December 7, 2022 meetings. So I hope you have minutes, so I hope you have time to review them. So any comments? Or if you don't have any comments, if I can have a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve. Second.
Julie, you got it?
Mhm.
In favor?
Aye.
Okay, anybody opposed? Everybody? Perfect. Easy. For first time. Any public comments? Anybody from the public? No? Okay, so we have in the agenda, the next item that we have is a discussion of remediating school damage by Hurricane Ian on the Barrier Islands. This presentation is supposed to be done by Mr. Ross, Executive Director of Operations. I don't know if he's called.
Have you heard from him?
The last I heard, he said he was gonna have one of his staff members preparing the presentation for the meeting.
Okay, well, such is life.
Mr. Rickenbacker is doing the presentation.
All right, I'm gonna be somewhat vague because the Barrier Island projects are still a work in progress with the superintendent and his staff and the community. But I can give you an update of what we're doing on these schools. You saw in the news where Sanibel, we have remediated and we're stabilizing the building. So in effect, what we've done is all of the muck, wet material, things that could cause mold, things of that nature, and so forth, have been removed. We have air clearance. Oh, here he is.
Right on time.
Hey, Mr. Spot in line.
How's everyone doing today? Great, how are you? So want me to go right now?
Yeah, you're okay. I was just gonna give a generic talk and you can't, so.
Let's see how you do. I said, let me see how you do. First, good afternoon, I apologize for being late. Taking care of a number of issues we got going on, just with affordable campuses opening and always fun times. Making sure that the students are all set and getting in and transitioning to a new campus and getting ready to demo another one, so a lot of moving parts. First, if I could introduce our acting chief CFO, Jeff Wagner. He's been with us for about 3 months now. Okay, and is assisting us with his expertise. He was the chief facilities officer in Vegas under Dr. Bernier in Clark County, and also has an architecture degree and brings a lot of experience to us, especially with all this hurricane work and efforts that we have going on. So glad to have him and wanted to bring him to introduce him to the team. I don't know, have any words or?
No, happy to be here. We're doing a lot of good work and here to support the team in a temporary capacity. Set up a good foundation for success and we're in the right hands.
So today I know they went to hear about the Barrier Island schools. And kind of just wanted to give you a little information on where we are with each of those. So, starting with Fort Myers Beach, Elementary School, did, sustain significant wind and flood damage, due to the storm surge. We're working on the, current remediation of that historic building. Prior to the Christmas break, we, brought to the board, board liaison here, brought to our board, 4 options on what to do, with that campus. You can definitely pull up that board presentation. A lot of the Fort Myers Beach, families and parents were there. We've been having some periodic meetings with them to keep them up to speed. Actually have one, this Friday evening, at a restaurant with the community to kind of get their feedback now that they've had a chance to digest these options. So I'll just kind of go through them real quickly. Option A is to stabilize the historic building and maintain this readiness to reopen. So, go ahead and stabilize that building and kind of keep that campus ready on standby. So as things improve around, as students, as parents come back to the island and somewhat reassess when to open and remodel that campus. Option B would restore that historic building. That's going to be a theme in each of them. And then utilize for the 23-24 school year. Option C, restore the historic building and then look to add new instructional space around it. And then option D, restore that historical building and look to sell that property. Obviously there many options in there, but hoping that they could be, work with the city, the island government. There's charter school options out there being discussed. There's all kind of options, but those were the kind of the criteria that the options that we gave them to consider. The feedback from them was, thanks for these options. Give us a little time to, kind of get ourselves straight. A lot of moving parts still going on the island, a lot of stabilization and repairs still just going on there. So they wanted some time. This was, I guess, early December, maybe late November. This was presented. And then, again, we're going to come back and receive that feedback from them, get a little better direction on which avenue, which option they would like to move forward with. And then that, again, will go to our board for their decision on kind of which one of these options or alternates that they would like to move forward with. Scott, do you have anything I missed? Fort Myers Beach.
No, I think I would just emphasize the staff's role in this process is to provide objective information for the board to make a well-informed decision. So the ultimate fate of Fort Myers Beach Elementary School will be brought forward as a vote to the board. Our role is to give them objective information, and we provide a number of scenarios. They've asked us to continue to work with the community to explore additional scenarios. So the superintendent will be meeting with the community. The meeting has been publicly posted at Fort Myers Beach, 6 o'clock on Friday, so that board members have the option to attend or not attend. It will be the second in a series of meetings with the community. You may or may not have heard public comment last night. They made a statement that everything's going to get reimbursed, let's just go ahead and build the school. That is not entirely correct. What has been told to the community and is correct is FEMA eligible expenses include temporary facilities. The rebuild of what was already there. That, just because the expense is eligible does not mean that FEMA will do 100% reimbursable. It has to meet a reasonableness test. So for example, if a temporary campus is put in place with the intent to let the community grow the student population for a number of years, FEMA would look at that and say, well, your timetable to rebuild a campus was only 18 months. So 18 months of that temporary campus may be reimbursable, whereas anything beyond that 18 months is really an expensive service for people to absorb. So it's not cut and dry when you're dealing with FEMA. And And I think maybe last night the public comments oversimplified the process that we're going through. It was also noted that the waiver of 50% rule has been requested. The reality is all buildings are subject to the 50% rule, and I don't have to explain the 50% rule in this group, everyone can understand it. Certain waivers can be applied, and one of those cases is buildings that are on the historic register. So we met with the State Historic Preservation Office, and they made a visit down here. We then put together a formal request to have a waiver put in place for building 2, which is the only building on campus that is currently on the historic register. And we will work through SHPO and FEMA for that process. And then I think it's probably appropriate to take questions side-by-side basis, so if there were any questions about Fort Myers Beach, this would probably be the appropriate time to.
I have one, I'm just curious, the timeline from starting the hurricane to where we're at to where ultimate decision will be made. Has there been any kind of timeline set up by a certain month this year? We'll know which direction we're gonna go. Has that been figured out yet?
There's been conversations about timeline, but nothing definitive. And part of that is, it's a give and take. So while we, as the school district, could simply put together a recommendation and take it to the board, we've chosen to engage the community. The community has asked for additional time to engage in these conversations. So there's not only what is relatively the second part of the equation, how do you rebuild a building? We know how to do that.
Yeah.
We know how to put a building 13 foot in the air, we know what it's going to cost. Those are all very objective things. There are ongoing conversations about ongoing operational expenses, the appropriateness of schools on Barrier Island, and if it is rebuilt, what should be rebuilt, and those are much more complex conversations that need to involve the community, and again, the community has asked for some additional time. So we're working with them to gather their input and make sure that it's well represented before an ultimate recommendation is made to the board. Again, the board has the ability to accept that recommendation, reject that recommendation, or modify that recommendation. I would expect in Q1 of 2023 that we will have a agenda item and go to the board, and some decision will be made as far as giving you a hard and fast date.
Talking about options, I always look at the dollar sign.
have the name,
sign, right? Do you have that amount, or just not determined?
No, those amounts were determined and presented in the presentation to the board. I don't have them on my head, but they were used for approximately $3 million.
So that could be, exactly the final.
Can I ask a question, a technical question on FEMA? So if the 50% rule is not waived and you're gonna build it, basically a new building that is up to code, does FEMA cover 100% of the cost of that building, or just to bring it, to rebuild it how it was before? Who covers the cost to bring it up to code?
Unfortunately, there's not a good black and white answer to that question. In theory, FEMA will cover what it takes to return the facility to its former use, meaning if the 50% rule got triggered and you had to build a new building for it to be able to function as a school, it would cover reasonable expense. Meaning if you had a Honda at the beginning of the project, you can't go build Bentley. But is there ever a guarantee that FEMA will reimburse 100% of any project cost? Anybody who tells you there is a guarantee is lying. There's a very lengthy process for reimbursement, and I know many of you have gone through this process in the room. So I cannot with 100% certainty tell you that 100% of the cost will be reimbursed. I can tell you the concept is you're made whole after the event. In this particular case, because of a 50% rule, the only way to be made whole would be either obtain a waiver and or build it. It gets much more complicated than that, and we have interior consultants on board that navigate the FEMA process and help us, put us in the best position to obtain the most reimbursement. So, I'm not trying not to answer your question, just trying to be very careful about what I say, because I want to manage the expectation that we do understand about FEMA is a complex process, we're the appropriate consultant to help the district navigate that process, and to give us the best chance for the most reimbursement. It has not been determined what will ultimately happen at Fort Myers Beach, and it is not staff's role to make that determination. The staff's role to bring forward objective information for the board to make an informed decision.
Thank you.
You wanna go through? Any more questions about Fort Myers Beach?
All right, so
One last question, I'm very sorry. What are your expectations for the future population of students out there?
So we have actually, we do have data demographics and consulting, we have put together a population matrix. And those were presented as part of the presentation. Part of the presentation to the board, we did give them the demographic information that was developed at the time, which was pre-storm. And we have retained data demographics to redo that allocation. But those numbers have been shared with the board.
Yeah, something else, something.
Projection, where's the, didn't they have? So the current, no, that's just the current year. So we have projections out through 2031. The current enrollment as of 2021 is 57 students. The projected growth of enrollment is to 81 students. Based on the model that David Demographic did pre-storm, we'll have to do post-storm modeling, and a lot of variables have changed. Nobody imagined that the beach would be flattened, and essentially, it's a horrific situation, but it also creates a clean slate for development, and development may go in a different direction now. Because of that.
Thank you.
Frederick, just so you know, that, you can turn that laptop right there if you want to take control of the screen, if you want to take it over and get it.
Yeah, but I just got all the documents here.
Yeah,
Well, I'm saying, you can detach from that, so then you can take the screen.
Okay, and then I guess another option, Julia, I guess we could give you these presentations,
well, they were part of the board presentation, so I believe they're public documents.
yep.
We're not telling you anything that hasn't been presented to the board.
I saw him trying to put it up on the screen and not able to. Be able to pick it off pretty easily if he wants to.
You want to stuff.
He's switching computers. You know how to put it back on though, right, once he's done?
I should be able to.
We'll let Ryan help it.
There you go.
She can't.
Screen mirroring. Shouldn't you know that? That's all right. I'll just read my presentation to you, that's fine.
Yeah, while Frederick's doing that, we can,
Can go back to Sanibel.
yeah, we can talk about Sanibel. So, obviously Sanibel also took storm surge, a different level of storm surge. And that campus happens to be split level, meaning it's all one story, however, there's an older portion that's not as high above sea level as the upper portion of the campus. That lower portion took approximately 4.5 to 5 foot of water. The upper portion took anywhere from 6 inches to a half of an inch of water. So different levels of damage across the two parts of the school. Remediation has been done across the entire school, which is removal of material, removal of drywall, drying the spaces out, maintaining the environment, putting those pieces back together. We're currently working on repairs to the electrical and mechanical systems, primarily that were on the lower section, so being submerged under seawater is not good for electrical systems or mechanical equipment. The contractor is working on replacing those components with an expectation that that work will be completed on or before the end of this month. Once that work is completed, then there's a transition period for the school to move back into that space. When we say move back into that space will have been stabilized, so, I'm sure you're familiar with Lexington Middle School. Obviously, there's still permanent repair work that needs to be done at Lexington Middle School. Centerville will be much the same way, there will be permanent work that will need to happen after the school is reoccupied. But good thing there, the roof held up, so we didn't get deluged with water inside. The second portion of that campus, the newer portion, has been elevated. So the storm surge, while it was severe, was not nearly as severe as the storm surge taken at Fort Myers.
Any questions on Centerville?
Actually, what is the capacity, how many seats do you have in Sunnyvale?
Student enrollment's approximately 225 students. I do not know the capacity on that.
Okay.
There was quite damage on the new structure, the elevated structure of that school.
The elevated portion of the campus did take on some water, significantly less than the lower portion. Storm surge was, again, between 4.5 and 5 feet at the lower portion, anywhere between 6 inches, and the cafeteria took on almost no water.
Scott, have you seen it? Have you been out there? Okay.
I got one more question, and this is regarding the two schools. So we know that FEMA or the companies that are working with the school district right now are working on the mitigation of the damage from the storm, but from that phase, that is a halfway job, like you pull the garbage, you dry the school, but the school isn't finished, to the actual work. The school district needs to wait for FEMA funds, or was it
No,
manufactured for
so,
that?
there are certain things that can be executed under emergency contracts, and the work that was executed under emergency contract was the stabilization of the school. Essentially what you saw with, national contractors coming in, remediating the work, and putting it back to the minimum required to reoccupy the space. The permanent work, is FEMA eligible for reimbursement. It has to follow as closely as possible the school district's typical procurement process. So what's happening currently is, in consultation with Imperium and the procurement department, all of the contracts that the school district typically uses are being evaluated for compliance to ensure that they meet all FEMA regulations, so that we don't go use a contracting vehicle that 3 years from now FEMA says that's not the appropriate contracting vehicle, we're not going to reimburse you. That's currently happening. Some of that work has started where we had contracts that were FEMA compliant, Simpson being one of them. We were able to move quickly on, because our FEMS contract met all the requirements. Other contracts such as roofing and carpet, paint are currently under review. Appropriate amendments are being made and negotiated with subcontractors. Once those amendments are made, we'll be able to move forward on that work. So the district is not waiting on reimbursement. FEMA reimbursement can take months and more likely years. There is funds in place that are being used in the interim to expedite that work. So we are making sure we're in good shape for FEMA reimbursement, but we're certainly not waiting on FEMA reimbursement. We'd be waiting for quite some time.
Thank you.
On that note, was the Hurricane Charlie FEMA reimbursement ever like finally closed out and settled?
I can't
You said Charlie?
Yeah.
I would hope Charlie, and I know obviously Irma's not, but yeah, we could, we got to give it our business services team.
I just happened to know Charlotte finalized their Charlie FEMA reimbursement 3 days before Ian did.
It's a lengthy process.
Yeah. Anything else on Centerville?
Yeah.
And then for me, I think.
Yeah, I thought you would
sorry.
give us a little update from the presentation to the board.
So there has been no presentation from the board to Centerville. This actually, what you're looking at on my notes, the reason I pulled this up was to show you the Fort Myers Beach presentation to the board, which is on our board docs. And I think the main reason we want to get to this, he talked about some of the projections. That came from that page that kind of shows from Harper, you see on that one. Going from 57 in 2021 to a projected of 2031 of 81. Again, this is before hurricane projections. This is a very interesting slide that kind of shows our cost from the district standpoint, as compared to the revenue that we receive, from the state per student. It shows that we're basically been operating in a deficit, for Fort Myers Beach for several years. In addition, this one kind of compares our Fort Myers Beach, cost per student, to our other, Bay Area Island schools. And showing, even compared to the other Bay Area Island schools, is, significantly more, and then definitely more than our district average. Yep, and I think that was the main reason we came to this, was, those were the same, four future considerations, we discussed. But in the actual presentation for each one, we dig down a little bit, and that last bullet gives you that estimated cost of that, option. So for option A, was at about 4.6 million.
The last slide.
Okay. 10.2 for option B, 19.8 for option C, 3.7 for B, and we're trying to get to a summary that kind of has everything there. And then this is on our board docs, which is already presented, and we can give this to Julia to email out to the team. But again, as Jeff said, this is staff presenting the board and the superintendent with all the facts, and the public with all the facts, so they can be informed for their decision-making process.
And that means it's above your budget.
No, the red means cost to the district,
Cost to the district.
and the black means proceeds from the sale of the land.
But cost to the district and then continued losses for what the cost per student
This is construction
This
costs.
is-
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm just-
There's operational expenses.
that continue
Yeah.
to,
So you're gonna spend 10 million to keep losing 1.3 every year.
Well, but schools are not only a moneymaker, they're also for the community, so. There's a reason we are there, because we there. So I don't know if you, have an update on Pine Island. Pine Island is okay, doesn't have any.
But I took
issues,
very
anything
little
that-
damage, surprisingly,
Mhm.
very little damage. I think we have a handful of work orders that maintenance is working on, but there was no major sustained damage to that building. We were without power for a while.
Has the driving force for the cost per student station really been identified, on the per student basis? That's quite a difference. Is that mostly operational costs, is it transportation? What exactly, is that identified, why it's so much higher than the other schools?
There's
Probably a number of
There's a lot of contributing factors to that, and that cost comes from across the entire district, so operations staff wouldn't be able to speak to the nuances of the cost per student at Fort Myers Beach, but it does include staffing costs, it includes transportation costs, it includes costs such as utilities and things of that nature.
I mean, it's significant compared to Sangerville. You would think that would be,
Significantly different size student body.
If you achieve your 81 students, would that then offset the cost of operating the school? Would it balance out eventually?
I don't know that we have the information to speak to a break-even point, but obviously more students reduces the cost per student.
And is there any, request from the town to have a school that goes beyond elementary?
Well, there have been concepts of the K-8 floated, and we have looked at what K-8 enrollment may look like. It wasn't included in the presentation, but off the top of my head, don't quote me on this, I think it was like 131 students. versus
So the cost
81
is-
students.
Unaffordable. Okay,
But busing 50 students off the island is not cheap either.
yeah, K-8 has a lot of empty space.
Well, this is a significant piece of property, so even if you maintain it, there may be an option of the two. Bayside Park was kind of stretched thin, if that comes back with the town. There's some acreage there that really doesn't justify 81 students, I think.
I think our piece of property is 26 acres, if I recall correctly. So there's some adjacent park space that is owned by the town that is not, I see you're shaking his head, that's about right, 3.6 acres? Yep. And I apologize if my numbers aren't exactly straight, there's a lot of numbers in my head. Again, there's a lot of nuance and information that goes into making an informed decision. And all valid points that you brought up today. I'm sure that the superintendent and the board is moving through those issues as well as dozens and dozens of others that we haven't identified.
So I have a question, like a neighbor question, but I happened to go to Fort Myers Beach today, and they took all the debris out of the street, and now the debris is piled on the properties. And a lot of times, that debris is from very old buildings, so I'm sure there's asbestos and hazardous materials. So they are also piling a lot of debris on the site that belong to the school. So I'm sure it's the town doing that, it's not the school
Is that the
district,
park next door?
or the park next door. So how is the district gonna deal with all of the debris that is being accumulated on sites that then will have to mitigate it too?
Where the debris being piled is not actually school district property. That's the town of Fort Myers Beach property. And we will have to work with the town to mitigate that hazard as we would any other hazard. So there's debris piles all over the general area, and this would not be the only school that has a debris pile adjacent to it. There are not debris piles, to my knowledge, on school property adjacent to a school. So if you see a debris pile adjacent to a school, it is on property that's not under our control. In general, the school district is opposed to putting the hazard that close to the school. Unfortunately, balancing community need with all the other things. So I can't speak to how that debris pile will be dealt with because it's not our debris pile, it's not on our property, but we will engage with the town of Fort Myers Beach to ensure that the hazard doesn't exist if and when students return.
There was a pretty tight relationship between the school and that park. They do all the.
Oh, yeah, there's
programs over there.
there's
They use
process
baseball
agreements
fields, Little League,
and MOUs in place and things of that
Yeah.
nature. So, for the school to return to full function, we'll need use of that park.
Well, thank you so much. Anybody has any more questions?
I don't know, are they done with their presentation?
Yeah, I mean,
That's what Mr. Will say.
We're going to do three, Berry Island schools, and we, pulled that one up from Fort Myers Beach board presentation, just to give you that information, and we'll send it out, but yes, that was our presentation that hit on those three schools.
We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
But, and another interesting fact on that is, look at the increase in numbers over the last 2 years. Like it was close, it was relatively tight to the Centerville School 3 years ago. Now it's getting close to double. If you look at 2019, it's not that wildly different, and then you look at 2022, and yeah, it is. It's just an
Interesting bit of data. You can't speak to why that is. I'm sure that the individuals put the numbers together, that they have the supporting documentation.
One last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You guys have, you have separate insurance policies for these buildings, along with flood insurance for these buildings, or are you just relying on FEMA?
No, the school district has a variety of insurance policies in place. Some are district-wide policies for property damage. Flood insurance has to be carried property by property. And we expect reimbursement of approximately $100 million in insurance proceeds. Our need will far outweigh that $100 million of insurance. And that's a combination of a $75 million general property damage policy carried by the district, and then the aggregate of the individual flood policies carried at the buildings that sustain flood damage.
Gotcha, so that FEMA's just an additive to that.
FEMA is a stopgap, and my understanding, and FEMA is not my expertise, but my understanding is if you do not carry insurance, you are essentially FEMA ineligible. So, yeah, the district had appropriate insurance in place.
Yeah, and our, great question, another presentation that was prior to our Christmas break, was done by, a company called Imperium, which is our FEMA consultant that we've brought on. And they did a very, detailed, presentation to the superintendent and board regarding our different funding sources, our kind of estimates on where we are, in terms of expenditures and, expect to be in terms of expenditures, for the storm. So that would be another good presentation if you want more information about specifically the funding sources, to respond to this.
Okay.
I feel so later too.
Was
We
that?
done?
I'm done.
Well, thank you so much. And next on our agenda, we have a presentation from Mr. Rickenbacker, Director of Construction Services. This is a discussion of closeout procedures for general contractors. The floor is yours.
Julie's just trying to bring,
Oh, you have a PowerPoint too?
just a couple.
That's great.
Mine's more talking than anything else. So, it was brought up, I believe, by Member Castellanos, predicated on the closeout of projects. There's been a lot of subcontractors who have been complaining about not getting final payment. Why is it taking so long to close out the projects? Hence, the contractors are blaming the school district. The school district saying, no, you need to provide the documentation. So we recently, I've got a template of the process that I'll go through with you. But recently, we had two of our larger projects at Gateway High School and the new Lehigh Acres Middle School build, which took a year and a half to bring to closure. Now, Gateway was brought to the board and approved for final payment in December. And the new Lehigh Acres Middle School will be going on the 24th of this month. So that's an exceptionally long period of time that subcontractor vendors weren't paid their 5% retainage. So we've implemented some processes, but basically we come up. So basically, we come up with the phase one we call the closeout checklist. And I know it's very small, but it's an intricate checklist that we have in-house that we've used for a number of years and slowly modified it. There's information here that's provided by the design team, architectural, mechanical, civil engineering. There's information provided by the project management, construction management firms that's required. And then there's district project manager oversight documentation. This all needs to be in-house prior to us bringing this forward to the board. Okay? The checklist is distributed to the construction managers, usually at the beginning of the project, so they can start compiling this information, and hopefully when we get to substantial completion, they're ready to go. It should be a very smooth transition. Unfortunately, many of them hesitate to put it together until the bell goes off. What we did is we had problems in our contract. Our contract is very weak. I've recently sat down with our legal department, we've tweaked it, and for the contracts that are currently engaged with many of the construction managers on projects, we are doing an amendment to the contract to try and tighten up some of the language. And on the new contract, the main contract, the language is already going to be embedded to those. So when the project, construction managers go to sign the agreement or goes to the board, that'll already be in place. So we're trying to correct the contracts that are already in place and active, as well as the future contracts.
This is an arrow button.
Forward button.
Yeah.
See, that was the first mistake, right?
All the way forward.
Julia, why don't you do the slides for me, please?
Okay, let me just grab a copy of the presentation. You don't get that.
I have a mouse on mine. So anyway, the next phase, so that is your phase one project closeout checklist. Phase three of a project is the auditing process. So we have any projects that are under $200,000, no auditing is required by Florida statute 255.078. Those are quick projects, small projects, and the intent is to quickly get that back and get all the retainage. These are predominantly smaller vendors that are involved in many of these projects. The next projects we have in the continuing contract program are 200,000 to up to 4 million. The 4 million just got increased by state statute just last year. It used to be 2 million, so then they've now increased it to a value of $4 million. That also gets audited by our internal auditing department. That's a group of people. We have an auditing department that will review all of the documents, the pay apps, the change orders, and invoicing against that project. But that can go fairly quickly as well, because our internal auditing people typically take about 30 days to turn something around. And then we schedule to go to the board. Then we have projects that are $4 million and greater. Obviously, those aren't continuing contracts because we've exceeded the threshold. So that would be more of our large capital projects, our large building projects. Those are all externally audited. The exception to that case might be if it's a single scope or discipline project. What I'd like to move forward with, and we're going to be working with budget and finance, is let's say we have a roof project like here on the Lee Pack building, where it's a single scope project, and it's $6.5 to $7 million. I think it's reasonable enough to ask our internal auditing department to audit that as well. So those are conversations that we're working on those single scope items, because I think it's fairly simple, fairly straightforward, like HVAC replacements or in-like kind of stores. Now, if you want to see CPT plant, different stores, multiple disciplines, a lot more invoicing and various subcontractors involved. So that will give you an idea of the phasing. So anything under 200 grand, continuing contract, no auditing required. Anything projects from 200,000 to 4 million would be internal auditing as well, and it has an audit requirement. And projects that are over 4 million would be an external auditor, with the exception of single source scope projects. So the internal external auditing process, we have a checklist, and in the first week to week 3 months, we've incorporated an amendment to fix this process. So what the amendment basically states is, from substantial completion on our large capital projects, the construction manager has 90 days to submit all paperwork to our external auditor for review. If they do not meet that deadline, we as the owner have the option to give them grace for additional period, or hold the line, and they will be responsible to pay for the entire cost of the audit. So if that draft has just been approved, it's in place, we're sending that out to our current engaged contract as an amendment for the construction management firms to sign and agree to, as well as it's in the template for all new construction management contracts going forward. So we should put a little bit of meat in there to ensure that within 90 days the paperwork is there. And there's no reason it shouldn't be. What we found is we pay for things like Procore and software through our vendors to track and maintain. By previous audits in my department, we have every payout now comes in with at least 80 sheets of backup subcontract supported invoice, all the way down to cell phone receipts. That was a recommendation by external auditing in the state AG's office. That should have been scanned, put up into these Procore-like engineering software programs, so that when they had to click the button to send it to the external auditor, well, it wasn't scanned. And the people that used to do that job at these various companies were no longer around, or with other companies, they moved out of state. So now, the deadline is here, and they have to try and recreate all of this documentation. Hence why those two projects took a year and a half. It was an anomaly, but we're not gonna have an anomaly. We're always trying to improve and get better, and we heard our substitute vendors cries. And Art obviously has heard it more than anyone. He's the one who brought that item forward for a discussion on the topic. So if it goes correct, the external audit should take 1 to 2 months. To get onto the board, 1 to 2 months to schedule a board meeting and have it go through the process. And then final payment review is basically that checklist that I showed you initially. Once all those items are in-house and we have them, that's the shop drawing, as-built, record drawings, elevation certifications, asbestos, all those things. When that's in-house, then we can issue final payment, and that's when the checks are cut. So basically, you're looking at
9 months.
5 to 6 months.
Oh.
Right.
So when you send a project out for external auditing, do you still do your internal?
No, no. The external audit does the entire auditing of that particular large capital project. The checklist is still done by myself and my staff. That's once it's brought to the board, prepared to go to the board rather, I should say, my team will then go over that checklist and assure that everything is in place. We will not bring it to the board until all of that is there and then final payment. That's a recommendation that we make.
I have a question. One of the concerns that I always have with the closeout process is that when it takes that long, sometimes the paperwork goes to the architect when the warranties are already expired, especially the labor warranties.
Correct.
So you basically are reviewing closeout documents for a project with warranties that are expired.
You're absolutely
So
correct.
it shouldn't, because you're updating a procedure, shouldn't be considered like that all the warranties information that go in the closeout documents should be submitted by substantial completion?
Yes.
Because the 90 days and then 6 months to do the audit process, warranties are.
No, that's all in that same time frame. So when substantial completion, it would behoove them to have that same checklist and all the documentation in-house to us. That's part of project completion. So as Dana brought up, technically in a perfect world, in 4 months' time, we should have completed and closed out and made final payment to subs. So half of theoretical warranty, the year warranty on our contract would have expired, but we still would have the other 6 months to physically have warranty.
What's is there any teeth in your amendment that would prevent a contractor from, well, I'm up against this deadline, I'll give them what I have, knowing that I've only maybe met half the requirements, and I'm trying to satisfy them to get them off my butt.
Bob, you're so cynical.
I know it, I'm in the real world.
But your real world is actually what had occurred even
Yeah.
8 months after some of the projects I'd mentioned had occurred. Now, I'm not gonna play that game. At the end of the day, when 90 days hits, we're gonna send this stuff to my auditor. My auditor can immediately respond and say whether he has all the information he needs. If he doesn't, then the hammer goes down, and now they're owning at 50,000 to 60,000 fee for the audit, the external audit. Now,
I'll get there.
it's gonna get bigger than that, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Frederick, because there's a component B which hasn't been discussed here, and it has procurement and legal requirements that have to be incorporated into it. Currently, right now in our procurement process, there is no historical data or provided during this RFP process and scoring process. So a vendor who may potentially have not done such a great job closing a project out, it's not known during the scoring of that project. So I would like to see that changed. If it's your will as a panel, and you're in concurrence with that, there has to be a vehicle where if there's been poor performance or a lack of due diligence in any phase of the project, that, in my opinion, from the district perspective, should be made known to all of the scoring committee members. Because otherwise, we're just perpetuating a blizzard. But there could be legal ramifications, there could be procurement ramifications. So those are things that I would like to get with Frederick and with procurement, and if Jeff would consider it as well, and see what kind of teeth we can put in it as almost like a backup. If they don't do this, and we're struggling to still get the audit completed, then what is the ramification? And long-term, will it affect you to win other large district projects? I would like to think it could, but that's not my call. That has many pieces to it that have to be vetted out.
So, just out of curiosity, and I know most of us around this table are on the design side, but are you gonna do the same thing for the design teams? As far as grading them, or however you wanna do it, so that when you go back to presentations, you have that information. I think you have all fantastic design teams currently.
Of course.
Just so you know.
So you asked me that question when the panel with design.
But no, but I mean, you're, so one challenge is, you know, close out documents from contractor.
But the qualification.
So it's a procurement issue. On face value, it is a qualifications-based selection, which means that the quality of work previously performed should be taken into account.
Right.
There is some heartburn, for lack of a better term, around what can and cannot be disclosed during deliberations. That is my understanding.
Right.
So it is not a question that Mr. Rickenbacker can answer because it's not his objection. Now, I would say that, I'll give you numbers. Independent, third party, not an employee of the school district opinion. The past performance should be the primary driver. That's what a qualifications-based selection is, and in my previous life, that's what a qualifications-based selection was. If you failed to perform, that was reflected in future work that you received, so.
And Jeff,
I will support that, but the issue at hand is a procurement compliance issue, so Scott is not the appropriate person to answer that.
But to jump on that, we did have a scoring matrix in years past. When construction oversaw the procurement of these RFQ processes, there was a book that the project managers and at that time Art had worked in our division, actually had some scoring on various projects for all entities, and that was placed on the scoring committee table. And people had the opportunity to flip through it, look at the projects and see what the evaluations were and comments. And that ceased to exist once the solicitation went to the procurement department. And there could be reasons for that.
Yeah, I guess to put a pin in it, the official school district answer is our procurement process will comply with statute.
Right.
And we will utilize it to its best ability. So if statute and compliance allows us to consider previous performance, it would be our intent to include that moving forward. If statute can be the prohibited side, and I can't speak for statute. If statute prohibits that, then obviously we'll work with our procurement and legal department to understand what our latitude is. But personally, absolute performance is critical in a qualifications-based selection.
A couple of things here. At the end of the day, Scott's department is the one that's responsible in the paper if something comes up and says, well, you've hired these guys 4 times. They look to him versus procurement. And they go, well, I have no say in the hiring process. I got one person in that committee versus there's 9 of them or 8 people that are in that committee. So he has very little say into who gets. But as another note, I think that we might have control would be in the procurement process, add a section in there that says, if you haven't completed the final process of this project that you're in, the current project that you're in, you're not allowed to do that until you finish and complete the audit process, and then you can go forward. So that might be easier than putting it in the qualifications-based requirement, complete section.
We're all saying the same thing, right? We're all saying the qualifications and previous performance is important to us. My statement is simply, there's an existing process, for whatever reason that existing process exists. We will bring this forward to procurement and legal to ensure that any changes made to that process keep us in compliance. But staff's recommendation on that process is that previous performance is waived. We don't know that we do not have the unilateral authority to make that decision without input from legal and procurement. And then we can bring that back to the committee.
Well, actually, the CAC committee would be nice, assuming there were no legal or statutory issues, what would be the desire of this committee? Do you think some of the things we just discussed would be good things to try and move forward? Or would we would look for the support of this committee to help support that place?
I think there was an overwhelming support, is the impression I got, and the most appropriate vehicle would be to bring back options for the community to review and have input on. Once we have clarified what is allowed to keep us in compliance. So I guess the takeaway for Scott and the team is we will bring this forward to our procurement and legal departments with our recommendation. They will let us know what our latitude is within compliance guidelines, and then we'll bring it back as a presentation to the committee. Here's what we can do, here's our recommendations, and you can support or not support said recommendation.
Again, I think part of the heart of Dana's question is that, you know, the whole project kind of gets lumped together, right? So if a contractor takes way too long, or performs poorly, there's very little the design team can actually do about it. We can write it up, we can report it, we can call and beg every single day. Doesn't mean we're gonna get the paperwork any faster. And at the end of the day, you know, a year and a half later, we still get the black eye.
You're preaching to the choir, I'm a registered architect, I ran $500 million a year in school construction. There are ways to very clearly identify who is successful in a project and who is not successful. Part of my role here in my temporary capacity is to establish best practice. And we've already started to talk about what is standard operating procedure, where can improvements be made. Again, it's difficult to have a productive conversation in generalities. Obviously, construction projects are difficult, they're adversarial. The contractor's gonna blame the design professional's gonna blame the contractor, the contractor's gonna blame the civil engineer. We all live this every single day. There are objective, standard ways to tease out where performance has and has not occurred. So I think that the best thing to do in this situation is, correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like the committee's will is to include performance as a criteria. We will take that back internally, vet it with the various departments, make sure that we're still in compliance, bring forward a recommendation. And then at that time, I think we can have a conversation around specifics of the most appropriate way to vet a design professional performance is X. The most appropriate way to vet the contractor's performance is X. Is this infraction more important than that infraction, right? So if I don't submit a submittal, for example, I forget to submit a product submittal on acoustical panels, does that carry the same weight as I didn't submit my closeout documents? And obviously, it wouldn't, right? Those similar but very different performance criteria.
But isn't it the best way to vet your contractors and designers and everyone in the team, the facilities and maintenance and the teams that work, the daily work with construction are more involved in the RFQ process instead of trying to have a book to show people what the performance was?
And Jeff, if I may just,
Yeah.
part of that, it was heavy with construction maintenance in years past, and there were complaints that it was loaded with people going with CMs and design team, because they knew they'd get extra results.
And I think there are pros and cons to all methods. I think what worked best for me in my previous life, we established a process by which 360-degree evaluation was done at intervals during a project. So for example, you tend to use CMAR quite heavily here in Lee County, almost exclusively in Lee County. We had milestones throughout our CMAR process where a 360-degree evaluation was done. What that means is the contractor evaluated the architect evaluated the contractor, PM from the district evaluated both, they both evaluated the PM from the district. You started to develop a history of information so that when we did go forward and say, this person has consistently failed to perform, it wasn't an individual's opinion, it was, here's 3 projects that show consistently the issues been identified, the issues been identified, the issue has not been resolved. That, in my opinion, is the most objective way to do it, and that process came out of much these same concerns. Something came out of, okay, stack it with CM, they're gonna pick their friends, or they're gonna pick the guy who got it done, regardless of whether the guy who got it done actually got it done. And if you move away from that, you take a bunch of people that are not knowledgeable, they just pick it based on the pretty pictures that are in the proposal, or how well the presentation was done. So where we landed was creating as executive information over a period of time that then could be shared with the selection committee. So what I would say, caveat, is that system wasn't perfect, and no system is. Personalities get involved, and documentation doesn't always happen the way it should, and sometimes that piece of paper, that evaluation, doesn't have all the context that led to that, right? So perhaps you had a soils issue on a site, whether it was geotechnical engineer's fault, or whether not enough boring's done, who made that decision, who ends up holding that bag at the end of the day. Is that really what delayed the project, or was it current delay the project? So there is no perfect method, but I think what I'm hearing from staff and the committee is a desire to improve on that, and part of my role in temporary nature here is to set a strong foundation to move forward. So we'll be working on standard operating procedures, as well as diving into some of the day-to-day processes by which these procedures can be put in place and then expanded upon, right? And I'll finish that with, regardless of what's put in place in my short time here, it has to be enforced, and it has to be revised, and it has to be a living document. So it will continue to be Scott and his team's work, as well as the committee's work, to refine that and make the appropriate adjustments as improvements are identified.
I think your recommendation that bringing this back at the appropriate time when you're ready to this committee is the best way forward on that. I would also like to say that this committee has already adopted a number of topics that we're supposed to cover this season, this year. And we can, if you'll be back to us, if you'd be ready to be back to us in a specific time, we can certainly add it to our list of topics to cover. Although we'll probably need a motion to do that, because the other topics were added to our list by motion.
So if I can have the motion, or we can go to the good of the order, but I think it's a great idea to bring you back.
Well, I'll make that motion that the district bring back a recommendation for project closeout and documentation of performance at the time they deem ready to make that presentation.
I would second that.
Okay.
Now, point of clarification, so we have topics for meetings up through March 8th, according to our meeting minutes. April and May meeting topics are to be discussed. In other words, they're still open for discussion.
I know Mr. Schwartz had brought up a topic last meeting to be discussed at the April meeting. I believe it's in the paragraph below the meeting, one of the paragraphs in the good of the order discussion.
Yeah, why we don't address the future meetings in the good of the order, but, we have a motion and a second to bring the district back to discuss or to present the RFQ procedure and closeout procedures again when they are revised. So if everybody can, I would like to vote for it, so everybody in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Cindy, you have that?
Yes, I do, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you so much for the presentation. So we are at the end of the meeting, we're a little bit over, so we need to move to the good of the order. So, you want to start here?
Yep, as a future topic, I'd like to, make a mention there. I'd like to go through the roofing warranty process with the maintenance and construction, how that's held and how that's maintained, and because there's a lot of unknowns. You know, I visited a couple of these roofing projects during the storm, and maintenance is telling me that, you know, all these warranties are all these roofs are out of warranties, you know, or this roof was installed incorrectly. So I'd like to go back, you know, one of these meetings and just discuss.
So would you like to make a motion to
Yeah, I'd
add
like
to
to
the
make a motion
agenda
to
for,
add.
Julie, when is the agenda that we have open for new presentations? May?
That'd be fun, yeah, I'd like the motion.
Yeah, May, because Mr. Schwartz already voted for a topic in April.
Okay, So just, to discuss the roofing program, how you guys maintain that asset in your district and, you know, computerized asset, you know, who's in charge of it? It used to be, there was a big book about that, taking one person had it.
Still is.
Okay. Is it with maintenance or is it with construction?
It's in May.
It's in maintenance, okay.
Okay, so your motion is to bring the school district to the meeting of May, to invite the school district to the meeting of May to review the warranty process and procedures for the roofing project.
Correct.
So-
Just clarification.
I'll second.
And it's, yeah,
Who seconded,
Bob
please?
second, Bob Taylor.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Wow. This is a nice group tonight.
Yes, I have one thing, and I should have brought this up at the beginning of the meeting. I've been asked to speak up for Mr. John Tobler. He could not attend the meeting today because he's involved with a school district project, trying to close out a project right now. And he's working on behalf of the district, so he's asked that he be excused from this meeting, as opposed to being marked down that he did not attend.
Okay. And I just wanted to interject too, that y'all should go ahead and vote on that motion, but I'll need to check with Mary Reeder from the board office to find out, because they're very strict about three absences policy. And I'll need to clarify with her that you know, that motion and vote can stand.
We will, Julia, but they'll make a motion and vote on it.
Yeah.
And give you the support to go talk to Mary.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
So my motion would be that Mr. Tobler be excused from this meeting because of district responsibilities.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. So do you have the thing now with second?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so.
Good.
Okay, good.
Kind of more of a question, but I noticed there's no phase two in your presentation.
Unfortunately, the original draft I did got lost and staff had to recreate it. I was off today. I came to the meeting. So you are correct.
Okay.
But phase one begins in a project generically. We have a project startup checklist. That is all of the documentation I need in order to issue you a notice to proceed in the building scope, fitting in your work scopes, whether it be architectural, civil, or construction management.
The phase one is up front and phase two is really for that.
And then we have a project closeout checklist, which was up there.
Right. Yeah.
And that's everything at the tail end that brings it in for final.
They'll have phase 2 in 90 days. It'll be
Good Tetra.
I think I missed an opportunity during the discussion earlier, but do we have any of the bigger contractors who are doing big schools? Do we have a separate clerk of the works?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Clerk of the Works was back when I was in my 20s, but
Well, it's, if you have an owner's rep that's adversarial, just, or could be, the clerk of the works is, in my old understanding, is just a third party or somebody who's really collecting all that data, as the project progresses.
well, here's how it works. We are the owner.
Yeah.
I have staff that oversees and attends and provides direction during the design phase of the project and the oversight of the construction. The architects, civil engineers, mechanical also are my agents under my umbrella, as well as the construction manager is an agent under my umbrella. It's our job to coordinate, orchestrate those three entities with the building official, architectural firm, and the construction manager to come up with a design, a permittable set of drawings to begin construction, and then construction oversight. Now, the construction manager maintains all of the documents for the project. The architect maintains all of the design documents of the project and the permitting plans. At the end, it is the construction manager's responsibility to provide to the architect all of the as-built or record drawing changes so that we get a set of accurate and true record drawings. Now, those are not signed and sealed by the architect because it's the information typically provided by the construction manager. But the architect does review those for adequacy. It states that they're reviewed and they go in for our project. And again, we maintain those records over at the Canal Street office in the maintenance archives file, digitally as well. And so I'm not sure about a clerk of the works. I buy that function through an AR contract, maintain all documentation. Now, we are working on getting the engineering software that is currently, we're having presentations from many companies that will engage with ourselves, maintenance planning, even procurement in some regard, but it all has to work with PeopleSoft as well. So we're looking at having our own engineering software programming, which we will have control of, and that will be, for lack of a better term, a requirement of the construction managers and architects to upload into our system all of that information. So executives can go into that system, create pie charts, look at cash flows, point of matter scheduling, milestones being met, delays, all those things that normally up till now, we've been buying that service out of the construction manager.
Thank you. You just gave us another task. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll take it.
Problem is that every district and government agency has a completely different software. So every time it's a steep learning curve
Well,
for everybody involved.
that's why we're doing this. We want to be the keepers of our own data and our own information. I don't want to rely on 7 years from now, a firm could go out of business and we don't have all those electronic files and all those little shop drawings, one pagers or a roll-up door closer. And so it helps us be in charge of our own destiny in the future.
Thank you.
I don't know if that's good, I think it was a good word. Thank you. Considering the time, I have nothing. Thank you.
Okay,
You'll.
Good, thank you.
okay, so can we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, we're done. Good night. All in favor? Sorry, I forgot that. I forgot you have to vote. Democracy and I, we're gonna go to work together.